So just quickly want to say welcome to everybody. It's really lovely to have everybody here. Thank you for logging in the afternoon. I'm Jahan Zeb and I work with the mental health team at Umeed, and I'm really excited to be here and to have this conversation and to have all of you here to witness the conversation. To also say a thank you to our sponsors, the HD Parekh Foundation, who's supported the development of this map and sort of help us to construct this in that way with their support. Over to Denise to introduce herself.
Okay, hi, I'm Denise. I'm currently a fourth year student studying visual communication design, and I recently started working professionally as an illustrator and graphic designer, and super excited to be a part of this, and yeah, had so much fun in the making of it. So yes, that's about me.
Ravi. Ravi, will you introduce yourself? Okay. I think he might be having difficulties with the internet. Just give him a second to log back on.
Hi, Jay.
Hi, Ravi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Just, yeah, sorry. Go ahead, you can introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ravi Raj, and I'm an occupational therapist, part of Umeed's mental health team. It's so good to be here and to see all so many people who I know. And a large part of my work involves working with children, with disabled children and their families, and children who are at risk of uh, abuse and violence. And a large part of my work is informed by narrative practices. Yeah, so excited to be here with all of you and to share the process of this. Yeah.
Super. So I think we're just going to have a small conversation about sort of just the ideas around hope and hopelessness, and then also Denise and Ravi are going to share a bit more about the map, the process of looking at the map, and then also maybe we'd be excited to hear back from you if any thoughts or questions or anything that you want to share with all of us. I think it's exciting, really exciting to speak about this idea. I think it's been very close. Ravi and I have had sort of many conversations about hope, hopelessness, hopelessness, and what it looks like, particularly when we're consulting with people, with communities, with families, like you said, who have disabled children who are living with the family. And I think one of the things that has always stood out is sort of the role that hope plays in people's journeys, and also its relationship, I think, with hopelessness. So I think that's something that we're hoping, you know, to sort of understand more intimately, and also have people think about or reflect on using this map. I guess it's, we were speaking yesterday and we were talking also about what hope is not. And I think to not think about, because hope is popularized somehow as this really flashy, shiny thing that's at the end of a road, or poking out of a sky. And I think that what we've witnessed in our practice and what I've experienced in my life is more that hope looks a lot like, like, I don't know, like a jute fabric that's rough and worn, but has, different uses, or a blanket, chewed up blanket that little children carry for comfort, or maybe calloused hands, more like a reminder um, of territories that people have traveled or places that people have been, circumstances that may be frightening, may seem unsurvivable, can feel devastating. But then at the same time, there's this reminder that you've been through this, and that because you've been through it, then maybe you'll be able to pass through it or navigate through it again. And I think that's what we're hoping, that people will. We're hoping to invite people to have a look at hope in this way, to really think about, and we've drawn a lot from the work of Michael White, who often spoke about how these experiences exist, sort of together, and that we know hope, because we've experienced hopelessness, and that when we are experiencing hopelessness, it's because we know what hope feels like. What Michael often described, as what's absent but implicit, or what's subjugated right now, but really important and precious and cherished and there, for people. And how do we really, look at it as inviting people, to notice, um, how these two exist, and how all of us, especially, especially right now in, this last year in the pandemic, how people have, um, traveled this territory and really found, um, ways to stay sometimes on one side or the other, sometimes in the center, sometimes in different parts of the territory, between hope and hopelessness. So, what always helps us navigate territories, I think, is maps. And that's the hope for today's conversation, for us to be able to create our own maps. Yeah, and to really, be able to, uh, hold on maybe to some of the things that people discover as they use this map. So I'm going to hand over now, to Denise and Ravi. I think, maybe it would be great to hear, from both of you first, of sort of your experiences of hope, hopelessness, and what, some of the things that you were thinking about when you constructed, this document. Ravi, would you start, and then we can hear from Denise?
Yeah. Um, Jay, at some point, if I get stuck or my internet fluctuates, will you let me know by message? Yeah. Um, since this year particularly has been challenging for all of us, and in my work as a therapist, it was, we were all responding to this sense of hopelessness that constantly kept on coming in people's lives. And it was a sense of a universal feeling of uncertainty, of not knowing what's going to happen next, of this sense of hopelessness that started sort of entering or took center stage in people's lives. And to inform some of my work, I was thinking of, it's been 13 years of working with disabled children and their caregivers. And to know that disabled children have been performing hope every day before the pandemic too. To survive and to exist in an ableist world, what does it take to hold on to what they value, or what they dream or what they hope for? And that has informed a large part of my work. Because it's been 13 years now, I've also had the privilege of witnessing some young people grow. I'm not a parent, but because I meet families almost on an every week basis, sometimes I had the privilege to be part of families. Particularly going to share a story of this a young person. Her name is Dee. I'm going to call her Dee. And I met Dee when she was 3. And I still remember her walking into the therapy room with her mom and dad holding each of her hand. And Dee didn't know where she was coming, who she was coming to meet, but the only thing she knew was she was going to come and play here. This was a play space. So it's been 13 years. She's 16 now. And she still wants to be a doctor. She was 3 when she told me she wants to be a doctor. Dee is cerebral palsied young girl who is blind. And I still remember her first, when you grow up, she said she wants to become a doctor. And we played a lot, and we have played since all along. And she never wanted to cure her disability or remove her disability. She was who she was. And but to watch her and witness her grow through school, through friends, through communities, and to see her perform Hope has been has informed a lot of my work, and in the same way many other disabled children. And I feel like what caregivers do, especially these parents, when they came, they kept on asking me, will she get better? Will the cerebral palsy go away? Will the blind? But I've seen them, witness them moving from that place to a part where now they see disability as an identity, as who Dee is. And I have seen that happening too. And the other piece I feel of care providers, therapists, and pediatricians and social workers who are constantly performing Hope in their interactions with children and families. So all this work is informed by their understanding of life and how they perform Hope. And the idea of the map really fascinated me when we started, when I learned about it 6 years back. Because the idea that we could navigate through it, and that hopelessness always will exist. But among this hopeless world, there were these know-hows or skills that Dee had that she was constantly using to perform Hope. So we thought that how about we put this into a visual form, a document that people could engage with, everybody could engage with, to document their know-how, their knowledges of Hope and how we perform Hope. And this applies to to everybody who is performing Hope and what knowledges we already have. So the map comes from a place of knowing. It assumes that the person who is going to hold this map knows about Hope already or knows about hopelessness already. It doesn't assume that people who are engaging with this map don't know, no, that they know already. So we start from that place. And that's why when you read each of these questions, you will see that they are inviting, like Jay said, of the person's knowledges um, to talk about what does hope look like for them, or what does hopelessness look like for them. Um, Particularly like the questions, like the first question, if you see, how do you know when hopelessness visits you? What do you feel in your body? And what starts happening? This question is really inviting of people, that people can sense when hopelessness comes around them, and that their bodies have a wisdom, that our bodies have a wisdom that tells us when hopelessness arrives. It's also challenging the idea of symptoms or pathologizing people's knowledges. This idea that the feeling in the heavy feeling in the chest, the heart patterns, these are, wisdom of the body trying to tell us something, that hopelessness is visiting us. So it's really inviting knowledges of the body, of the people, and how that is informing and how that might inform when hopelessness comes. The second question is about what are some of the little everyday things that have helped you in the past to navigate hopelessness? Again, the question assumes that people are already performing everyday acts of resistance in face of hopelessness, that we are never ever passive in face of hopelessness. We were thinking of all those times when children where caregivers, care providers, when you ask them what allows you to sustain, or what do you tell yourself when hopelessness visits? And there were so many things. And one of the common things I hear is that this shall pass too. And it's such a knowledge, a practice of living. People know that this shall pass too. So it comes from the place that internal conversation many of us have with ourselves, or we tell something ourselves in times of hopelessness, as a knowledge that can be invited, as a skill that can be invited into the conversation. Many a times these knowledges are dismissed as rudimentary, as not working, as not acknowledged by an institution. But we are sort of subversing that system and saying that institutions do not hold the power to produce knowledge that people's bodies and our lived experiences do. So really inviting, what do you tell yourself in face of hope? And to also, there's a beautiful assumption we're trying to sort of make, that hope and hopelessness exist alongside. And it comes from Michael's understanding that if people could sense hopelessness, is only because they know what hope looks like or feels like. That you wouldn't sense hopelessness if you didn't know what hope felt like. So the assumptions come from, again, a place of knowing that people know what hope is, even in the face of hopelessness. So inviting that assumption here. The third question, the fourth question, I'm sorry, I'm missing a question, I guess. No. The fourth question really comes from a place of identity as collective, that we don't do this work alone, that we don't perform hope alone, that there are beings, spaces, people that constantly, that we are in relationship when we are performing hope. And one of the tricks of hopelessness that we have discovered over a period of time of our work is that hopelessness loves to isolate people. It loves when people are alone. It's one of the tricks of the problem, that if people are isolated and alone, they are much more weaker, and they are much more, it convinces them that you have nobody in your life, right? The question really invites, who do you think of or reach out to when hopelessness makes things difficult? Communities, persons, or beings. The word beings was also added there because it might not be always people. It can be anything: a tree, a plant, a soft toy, a pet, a flower, anything that can be invited into this space of trying to break the idea of isolation that hopelessness creates. And we also added, like, after a lot of conversations and deliberations, the word you think of or you reach out to, because there is this constant pressure sometimes of reaching out, and it's hard in face of hopelessness sometimes. So even the fact that people think of somebody and that they invite their voice into the room is an important part in this conversation. So that's why we added thinking of. I particularly love the next question, write down a song or a poem, draw the place or a thing that brings comfort in tough times. Um, it's surprising what all people say, children say, in face of this question. Often, many a times, we don't even have to ask this question, it comes out in some form or other. And like, I still remember a dear friend who talks about uh, she has a tree, almost a tree now in her house, an avocado tree. I cannot pronounce avocado tree. So she put the seed, she loves avocado. So she put the seed of the avocado into the pot and waited for a really long time. A really, really long time. She also thought, okay, it's not going to grow. But suddenly, out of nowhere, it started growing. And she talks about this image she's a teacher of narrative practices, and she talks about this image as a way to talk about what it looks like performance of hope. Like the seed was constantly working itself, but it was not visible. So there are spaces, things that are constantly influencing us to hold on to hope or perform hope. The next question is inspired by Harry Potter. And this idea of draw or write about the happiest or a funniest or a love-filled memory from your life that reminds you what hope feels like. In Harry Potter, there's a scene, and I'm not remembering the spell, but the Dementors, when they come to fight off the Dementors, one of the most powerful spell is to use one of the most powerful memories you have. And it's been so true in the practice of my work with people. Expecto Patronum. Thank you. And Expecto Patronum comes this whole idea, and it's been so in the work with disabled children, caregivers, and also with adults and communities. These memories that often people hold on to, but it doesn't have to be a memory from past. It can be a memory from a future, of an image that people already have of what future can look like. So it doesn't have to be a memory from the past. Like we often associate memories with past, but they can come from a place of future because we are constantly, time traveling in our life. And the last question, I think I must have spent 2 weeks going in and out of that question, consulting many people about it, of the language of it. What do you know about hope that sustains you through the hopelessness tricks? That people already know something about hopelessness, that allows them to sustain. And hopelessness uses many tricks to make people feel a certain way. So it comes from, again, an assumption that people know something about hopelessness that allows them to sustain through it. And it's in their lived experience. And so I had all these ideas. I spoke to Jay about it. And then, we decided we'll do an illustration. And then Denise and I had worked before, and I follow her on Instagram. And one of the things that I loved about Denise's work was that she could hold both the contradictions of life together in her illustrations. Like if you see, it's both dark, the image, but at the same time has these outbursts of colors. And that was throughout of some of the work that she's done. And when we started speaking for the first time, we hit like the note so well. together, this image, to hold hopelessness and hope together, to not make hopelessness this thing that will go away. Because knowing D, she's 16, hopelessness has still not gone away, right? It will continue to exist because the world is ableist. Uh, and then, Denise and I went over again and again, to and fro throughout this work, keep on developing this, and we had this finally. And that's where these questions come from. These are questions that are prompts. They are like scaffolds, like Michael White calls them, like construction workers building scaffolds around buildings, and another territory of life. And before I end and move to Denise, I just want to quickly read something that Michael wrote, which was the inspiration of this work, because Michael is the one who thought about maps. And he writes, in the conversations of narrative practices that are shaped by our questions, we build a scaffold, much as constructions workers do around the sides of the buildings they are working on. It is in the building of this scaffold through our therapeutic questions and structures that we make it possible for people to get access to the other stories or territories of their lives. Upon first identifying these other stories about life, or if you like, these other territories of life, they seem really small, in fact, minuscule. These could be likened to atolls in the midst of a stormy sea. However, as these alternative stories or these previously neglected territories of life are further explored in conversations, they become islands upon which safety and sustenance can be found. And then many islands become archipelagos, and eventually continents of security that open other worlds of life to the people who are consulting us. And that's where this map comes from. So I move to Denise to talk more about the images.
Okay. Thank you so much, Raviraj, for that, and also for talking about hope so beautifully, and the coexistence of it. And yeah, I think hope for me, even when the project started, was just about mainly getting through the day. And a lot of it, especially because I was in a place of a lot of uncertainty, um, because of college, I had to move cities amidst the pandemic. And since like our college was a very authoritarian institution, it was difficult to deal with that as well. So amidst all this, and when Ravi Raj and me got talking about the zine, there were a lot of conversations that came up that really came from experiences that were known, that were very familiar. And I think it kind of came out through the visuals as well. And as somebody who's illustrating, it's very hard to separate yourself from the visuals. And so yeah, definitely, like, so many of these visuals have come out from experiences. And okay, so shall I go ahead and share my screen? Okay. Yeah, can you see it? Okay, so this is an 8-page zine. the first page starts from here, and then the
Yes,
second, third, and onwards. So I'll just begin with the first one. So I'll just talk about the colors a bit, and the colors are like extremely crucial to like illustrate this idea of the coexistence of hope and hopelessness. And initially, when we got talking, we were thinking of purples and blues and some kind of warm colors to balance it out. But also, if you look at the colors, they're not just bright colors or just dark colors, right? Even within the bright colors, you have their own shades, you have their own tints, and similarly with the darker colors. And that is kind of the palette that we established to, you know, bring that uniformity in. So with the visuals in the beginning, I just started off with like mapping words that would be in relation with the word math, and how that could demonstrate what we were trying to say, both literally and as well as metaphorically, right? Because we wanted to have it literally in the sense that people are able to look at it and probably see, have an example of what these actions might look like, but also not in a way that it dictates what you think about it. There is still room for interpretation. So in the beginning, you have this compass where the person using it is supposed to write their name, and this is more so to remind them of their agency here, right? They are navigating their own space here. This is their space for them to own, and that's what the compass basically is. And then you move on to the second page, where it talks about how do you know when hopelessness visits you, and what do you feel in your body, which is what Ravi Raj explained earlier. And one one of the words that came up while I was mapping this was how sometimes in times of hopelessness, it's very easy to get into this fetal position, this physical position, which is sometimes a position of defeat. But at the same time, it's a position of hope, because you are physically protecting your body, you are physically protecting your torso. And that coexistence is very evident in that position. Similarly, when you are stagnant at this place, there's a lot of times that we are so like aware that everybody is moving forward, you know, and everybody is able to find their own pace and find direction. And in times of hopelessness, it's very difficult to feel that kind of motivation to move forward. So that was about the first, second. Sorry. Yeah. And what are some of the everyday things that have helped you navigate this hopelessness in the past? And you see that lighthouse that is kind of really cutting through those cloudy times, and sometimes that is like, that's really necessary. And the lighthouse was an element that Ravi Raj had suggested, and it was an important one to, especially to have the writing within that light. And also, if you see the boat here, if you notice the rest of the islands, they're quite permanent landscapes, but in this case, the island is a boat, and the person is like cutting vegetables and watching TV, and something that's very mundane, but also in a way that is expressive of how we carry these acts of hope with us, right? It's not, sometimes it's never just location specific, but we have the ability to carry these acts along with us and go through with it. The next one over here is, yeah, sorry, this one. What do you tell yourself that lets you know hope exists alongside the hopelessness. So a lot of times with um, when the hopelessness visits, it's easy to get like drowned in it, and it's easy to get lost in it. And in this case, sometimes it gets like your hope gets bottled up in a place that is difficult to find, and sometimes you need to look at it with a magnifying glass, and you need to look at it a bit closer to find it, but it's always seemingly there. So that was one of the elements there. And moving on to this one, what do you think? What do you think, or reach out? Sorry, who do you think or reach out to when the hopelessness makes things difficult? Communities, persons, or beings? And here I think I really wanted to play with the scale of it, because here we're using people, communities, and beings as a metaphor for an anchor. They are your little anchor. And this conversation, this composition also came about while I was talking to someone else who is also kind of an anchor for me. And she was like, "Why don't you look at it like this?" And I was like, "Yeah, that makes sense." So I tried to play with the scale of it. But also, if you see those tangly like threads and ropes, it's not easy to always reach out. And it takes a lot of like courage to reach out. And I wanted to show that through those loops and non-linear lines over there. Moving on, write down a song or poem or draw the place that brings you comfort in these tough times. So actually, initially when I had drawn the storyboard for this, I had put in like these fierce sharks and things like that. And because I mean, probably that's like a personal bias. And Ravi Raj asked me, are you sure, are you sure that's the best way to, Ravi Raj, do you want to talk about that bit? I feel like you'll explain it much better.
No, I feel like it came from a conversation with another dear friend who's an environmentalist, and who would always talk about how certain creatures have been single storied into bad things or evil things, and that it is so unfair because these single stories influence people to take certain kind of actions or build relationships with creatures or beings in certain way, like a story that you tell about a certain community and it becomes a single story, and that shapes. So I think she had told me about how there's a single story about shark as these dangerous creatures, um, and I think that it reminded me of that when I saw the shark. And Denise and I had a conversation that will we participate in the perpetuation of that single story, and so we then moved out of that. Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so then we replaced it with the roughness of the waters, and just using texture here, because even the text is so stimulating that this is a space now where people can use it the way they want without having those external cues determining what they might think about it. And the seventh one, draw, write about the happiest or funniest or love-filled memory from your life that reminds you what hope feels like. And this was something that I wanted to show how kind of very like mundane things, something like feeding the birds or feeding the fish, something like that, uh, which isn't so like jarring or like per se monumentous, can eventually over time be a memory that can bring comfort in times of hopelessness. And yeah, that was that. And finally, the last page, which is the sorry, one second. what do you know about hope that sustains you through the hopelessness tricks? And you see like a broken net, and this particular scene comes from like my memory of watching Finding Nemo. It's a very like subtle reference to that, and one of the uh, scenes that I remember the most, even though I was like very young when I watched it, was um, there's this time where all the fish are caught in the net, and the only way they free themselves is by coordinating with each other to swim downwards, and that is when the net kind of breaks. And so this is a subtle reference to that. And so you can see the fish moving in and getting fed by the person there. And yeah, but at the same time, I also didn't want to make it obviously clear, because that's just how I perceive this image, and it's a reference to that. And also, like throughout, if I zoom out, you'll be able to see how all the elements, the visual elements, kind of interact with each other and flow into each other, and seep into the other pages. And that is mainly because of uh, to like demonstrate and support the idea of the interconnectedness of navigating hope and hopelessness, right? It's never like once you get to a point of hope, there's no like going back or vice versa. And it's uh, a very interconnected journey, and not the way to navigate this is not linear. And that's what I tried to do in the map. Of course, with Ravi Raj's help, and all the conversations that we had were so insightful that led to this.
Thank you, Denise, for sharing that. It's really lovely, I think, to see the little details and to look at this again. I think every time I see it, I discover something new that I'd not noticed the last time around. So thank you for that. Yeah. I'm just going to ask Ravi sort of one last question of some thoughts. I know everybody in the audience is excited to share, so we'll hand over to you in a little bit to hear from you. But Ravi, anything that you'd like to share with the audience about your thoughts of, um, what are the possibilities of, uh, using this, or ways or ideas that you might have of how people can share this, or where they can take it from here?
I feel like one to come to that place to know that a map is not a solution to a problem. It's something that helps us to navigate a problem or navigate something and understand it better. And maybe we will understand that hopelessness is not a problem, but uh, but something that is informing us that our worlds can be different, is asking us to rethink or reimagine our worlds. The fact that hopelessness exists or comes is because it's trying to tell us something. So that this map is not a solution, but a way to invite meaning making and to navigate through these contradictions of meaning making and discoveries of new islands and territories. So to use this map as a navigating tool of meaning making as a possibility. To one of the things that we also have imagined it to be a personal document for people to make. And what we love is that it looks like a book when you do the activity, but that it opens up into a map, when you open it up. So that people can stick it or open it. And Michael White often spoke about therapeutic conversations as a process of map making, that we are making map together of knowledges, of discovering worlds that have been subjugated for a really long time. So that these can be used with children, because there is space to draw. The paper quality really allows you to draw it, use any kind of equipment you want to. It can be used with caregivers, care providers, with communities. Um, and the questions are like scaffolds, so you can break them and have a conversation. They don't necessarily have to be like, if some of people say, I don't know what you're trying to say here in this question, then that we can really challenge the question and break it down, and that reform it in a certain way. We've tried to put bits of scaffold, but some of these are also asking, many a times these knowledges are so subjugated that the asking of question is a prompt to think. People might say, I don't know, but they leave the space thinking, what was there an answer to this, and then and I often see those expressions on people's face where they wait, they look around, they loiter for a while, and then it comes out, in a very tentative way. And that's where we acquire that and say, catch it and say, tell me more about this thing you're talking about, So it's also something that you can use to engage in a conversation, something that can scaffold. There are, like Denise said, there are no right or wrong answers to these questions. They're an invitation. And one of the things that Denise pointed out is there is no linearity in this. So it's not that you have to go in one way. You can go in any directions that you want to. And that there is no particular way, again, to use it. You use it in the ways you feel like. But like I said, it's a navigating tool, not a problem solving tool. And before, I want to thank my sister Sneha and my dear friend Namrata. Both of them are part of Umeed, early childhood development team exploring narrative practices. They helped us to translate the English questions into Hindi. So just wanted to also acknowledge that the whole translation process was also beautiful, of how it happened and how we chose words and we said, this doesn't work, this works, and just went to and fro. So just wanted to thank them too. Yeah.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Ravi. I think what really, from both of what you're saying and from looking at it and from all our conversations, that we've had before this, I think what really stands out is those spaces in between hope and hopelessness, and uh, you know, the back and forth that happens. I think, and that this gives people a way to navigate that and to stay familiar with it. I think so. Yeah, it's really beautiful.